Thank you. Thanks so much for introducing us, Abolaji. So welcome everyone to today's session. We are excited to be presenting on a topic that presents great potential in promoting positive youth development. My name is Sylvia Kananu, and I function as a Youth Excel project lead from the IREX Kenya office. Presenting with me today is Diego Manrique, who is our Knowledge Mobilization Officer from IREX Guatemala office. We have Karen Carbajalino, who is the COO and co-founder of the Biz Nation in Colombia. And lastly, we do have Zaira Lines, our Jesse officer from IREX Guatemala office. Next slide, please. So we'll kick off today's session by sharing a summary of what Youth Excel exists to do. And then we are going to spend some time talking about how power differentials visibly as well as invisibly manifest in our daily work. We will then dig into a research approach that we use in Youth Excel that helps to shift power to local youth. We'll have some time for questions and answers, and you're welcome to post your comments and questions in the chat as we go along. Next slide, please. As a new partner initiative program, Youth Excel's primary priorities are supporting local youth-led and youth-serving organizations. We support these YLOs and YSOs to become learning organizations, to champion inclusion, tackle power differentials, and use their data for youth-led advocacy. We further channel resources to local youth organizations that would not traditionally receive USAID funding. By providing this kind of support, we shift power to local organizations, something Ambassador Powers, I'm happy to note, has mentioned as a priority for this administration. I like to think of Youth Excel as innovative because we get a chance to test out and pilot approaches that we believe could be able to help address uncomfortable but important issues on decolonizing development. One such approach we use with local youth organizations is an approach called implementation research. We'll be hearing more about that today, but first we want to talk about power. Over to you, Diego.
Thank you, Sylvia. So my name is Diego Manrique, and I'm the Global Knowledge Mobilization Officer for Youth Excel. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about power and power differentials. And the reason why is because to talk about decolonizing development means, among other things, to talk about power and about different power differentials that we can come across. But before we jump into talking about power differentials and how Youth Excel is experiencing this, we're going to do a quick exercise. So if you could look at the screen, you will see two articles, and we would like you to please share with us which of these two are you likely to quote as a source for an article that you're writing. So on your left, you have an article about adolescent mental health produced by the World Health Organization, which is a United Nations specialist agency, which is based in Europe. And then on the right, you have an article also about youth and mental health, produced by a young communications officer telling the story of youth leaders working on mental health in Africa. So if you could please take a moment and look at the two articles and share with us, if you were writing an article, maybe an article about youth and mental health, which one of those two would you select as a source that you would quote on your article? So let's take a moment and you can put your answers on the chat. So I see a few coming. WHO, few youth. Great, depends on the audience. Great, so perfect. Thank you. So I'm going to thank you so much. You can keep on putting your comments and we'll move on to the next small activity. If you could please go to the next slide. Now, if you could please look at the screen again and share with us, who of the following are you likely to have on a selection panel? For example, in a youth mental health grant competition that we are running, you have 4 different profiles. You have a technical advisor, a trauma-informed approaches expert. You also have the founder of a youth-led organization, a student from the University of Cape Town, and the senior subgrants and capacity building officer of a program. If you were to select one of these people to be among your selection panel, who would you select? Okay, you can take a moment to look at the screen and share your answers in the chat. Okay, wow, lots of answers coming. It's even hard to read them, but thank you so much. I'm getting a glimpse of the different perspectives that we have. So ideally, it would be really nice to talk about this different perspectives that all of us have, but I guess it would take us the entire day. So basically what we're trying to do in this little exercise was to be able to see how power differentials are expressed in the decisions that we make about what information and what sources are the most valuable, the most credible ones. In most cases, and this is based also on our experience so far, youth are not considered to be credible sources of knowledge, since they often are considered to lack knowledge, to lack experience, to lack judgment or capacity to be able to be considered as credible conveyors of information and to be able to take informed decisions. And this is something that we've been seeing happening often in our activities. And all of this are an expression of power differentials. Sometimes sometimes it's easier to be realized of this, but sometimes it's not. In considering this, in YouthXL, we're trying to focus on tackling power differentials to inform-driven change. And this is what we are doing by our different activities. And we are aware that providing technical assistance and trying to strengthen capacities with youth-led and youth-driven organizations, which is the main population that we're working with, is crucial, but it's often not enough. And in order to be able to truly increase youth chances to have meaningful spaces for participation, for them to be able to lead knowledge production processes, as we're trying to do in YouthXL, to be able to help them into exercising advocacy and be able to influence, we also need to tackle power differentials. Particularly in our case at YouthXL, power differentials between adults and youth, but also between youth and particular actors, such as, for instance, decision makers, as well as development practitioners and also academia in the case of YouthXL. So it's clear for us that we need to be intentional about how and who do we work with in order to challenge and shift power dynamics to increase youth to have a more meaningful role. And if we move to the next slide, we are able to see some of the key findings that we collected from our knowledge mobilization desk review and listening series. So we were trying to understand how our partners experience the process of producing knowledge and what is the role that youth play in the knowledge production processes. How is it that youth are experiencing this as well? And we were able to find many interesting things, but we're presenting you 4 of them. The first one, which might not be surprising, but that it is important to highlight and to confirm today, is that youth are often not taken seriously by decision makers. And I think this is something that in a way or another, we can all relate to it, whether we are young or not, or we are working with young people or not. The second is something very important. It is that youth, unless having particular credentials, are not considered as valuable sources of information. And I'm actually an example of this myself. If I would not have the position that I hold within this global program working with the Global Development Organization, I would most likely not be in this presentation today, because maybe I would not be considered to have something valuable to say about decolonizing development. So therefore, it is really important that we are aware of the different roles and the different positions that we hold and what power relationships does that imply. And we also found that youth are considered not to know enough, but it is not just about knowing enough or too little. It's also about what type of knowledge do we hold and what type of information is that knowledge based upon. So we found that local information is often not as valuable as internationally or regionally sourced information, and local sources are not as trusted as international ones. Therefore, this puts local sources and many young people producing a very valuable information and very valuable knowledge from the local level in a disadvantaged position. And then we have very resourceful, big, powerful actors that are traditionally associated with producing knowledge, that are the ones that predominate and that determine in a way or another what is valuable, what's considered to be more credible and therefore more useful in the processes of decision making, for example. And last but not least, we also found that the products intended to influence policy should be presented in formats that are considered appropriate and that are, let's say, shaped in a particular way, therefore being most appreciated in a different way by decision makers and then to act upon them. So basically there is this focus on the form rather than the content. And again, there seems to be the structures in place that are impeding you to be able to have more meaningful roles even when they're producing quality knowledge and quality resources that can be used to these purposes. So basically, the reason why we're talking about power is because talking about power is crucial in the context of decolonizing development and initiating this discussion about how to decolonize development. And if we think about it, development as we understand it today is historically grounded in very unequal power relations. Essentially, a group of powerful and resourceful actors who are also often foreign to the local context believe that they have a solution that can offer or that can represent a handout to particular communities that are dealing with particular development challenges. And for a very long time, as we know, development was a very top-down practice. And even when today we are very much aware or more aware of this situation, and we are trying to implement better and more resources, more tools so that we can deal with this, power differentials remain at the core of what we do, and they can influence in a very significant way the outcomes of what we are doing in terms of development programming. So therefore, it is very important that we address this in a meaningful way so that we can enable sustainable changes that will be impactful, in this case for youth. But to talk about power is something complex, and this is why we're going to now move on to talk about the intersectionality of power. So over to you, Syra.
Thank you so much, Diego. So now we are going to talk about intersectionality and how it is connected with power and the work we do as part of the development community. In this slide, there is an image that shows the different aspects of our identity that are crucial to the way each of us face and experience our lives. Intersectionality is not simply about multiple identities. It is a way of thinking about power and interlocking structural inequities. It is a framework that allows us to see the complexity of different situations, and it makes us think, where is power? All the categories that are listed in this circle are sources of power that put us in unique positions. For example, I know that my experience as a woman is different than a man, but also my experience is not the same for all young women in Guatemala. Remember that each of our personal identities can power us up or they can power us down. In a world shaped by historical and structural inequities, as development practitioners, the transformative potential of this framework can help us to address those inequalities that shows up in the development field and each of our roles. Applying this framework not only in our work, but in our daily lives can facilitate more equitable youth-centered programs. As part of the development community, if we just do what is expected from us in an automatic way, and if we don't make a pause and ask ourselves in our daily work, what power do I bring to this equation? Then we can be perpetrating power differentials that are reflected as diverse ways of discrimination, exclusion, and marginalization. If we want to contribute to social justice and to the transformation of the communities where we are working on, we don't want to reinforce the idea that there's only one correct way to understand the world and do things. Let's think about it. Who decides what is funded, why, and how? Does that represent the main interest of the communities we work with? Who makes those decisions? What information is being considered for making those decisions? And in the opposite side, whose voices are not being heard and why? After this brief reflection about intersectionality and power in our work, please take a look at the image that is represented in this slide. There are 9 circles that represent some of the different aspects that make up our identities. Some of those circles refer to your level of formal education, to your gender identity, the language or languages that you speak, your income, your social capital, etc. And now I am going to invite you to please take a piece of paper or write down a note in your computer, in your phone, whatever it's easier for you. And please identify the characteristics in each of those circles that represent yourself. Please take a moment to think about this. Okay, and now think about your program's participants and their multiple identities as well. And now let's see, how many of these circles do you have in common with them? If you're comfortable, please put the number in the chat. Let's see if we get some answers here. So for example, me, Zaira, in Guatemala, I am a not indigenous woman from the city. I speak Spanish and English. I have higher studies from a private university, which provides me with a social capital. I am in a position with less obstacles than the youth that we are working with here in Guatemala. But this also changes on the global level and puts me in a different position, usually with some disadvantages, some more disadvantages than my colleagues in the international development community. One more time, please look at your identity markers and think whether they provide you privilege and power or the potential for disadvantage and discrimination. Think the same for the participants of your programs and reflect on how these identities in both sides of development impact the dynamics of the process that we are implementing. This exercise of using the intersectional framework to understand power and the interlocking structural inequalities in our work allows us to go beyond simply implementing the program's concept node and think about the impact that our programs have on diverse people at different levels. When doing research and learning activities with youth, think about the many aspects of the identities of all the people involved in that process and dare to ask the uncomfortable questions. Who is stating what is valid and credible research? Who's making decisions about what to research and how to do it? Whose voices are credible? Whose voices we are not hearing? Finally, I want to invite you to keep thinking about how do these identities in both sides of development, implementers and participants, impact the way, the dynamics of the work we do. Are we moving towards the transformation we want to support? Or are we exacerbating existing inequalities, inequities, or doing more harm? Now I will hand it over to Sylvia to talk more about what does decolonizing development mean for youth-focused research and learning, and what Youth Excel is doing in this regard.
Thank you, Zaira. So we've talked a lot about the nature of power, surfacing out differentials, and the connection between power and decolonizing development. We now want to talk about one of the ways to address these differentials to decolonize development. And we're going to start with a few questions. And so the first one is, what comes to mind when you hear the word research? This is probably a word we've used today, this week, sometime recently, and it's something we all encounter with as people in development. So when you hear the word research, what comes to mind? Please do put your answers in the chat. All right, a lot about data, academia, so much learning, solutions, examination, long documents with statistics, investigation, data, formal learning, Lab coats and clipboards, that is an interesting one. Investigation as well, statistics. So there's a lot of, focus on science and formal structures, I would say, as well as looking for solutions. Thank you so much for everyone. Books, yes, definitely. Who's putting their responses in the chat? And so I'm going to ask a second question. As we were designing Youth Excel, we did hear a lot of input around research not translating into practice. And so I am curious to hear if this has been your experience. Why do you think that research doesn't translate into practice? And so if this hasn't been your experience, or you have seen that in your programming, research does translate into practice, please also share with us what you think led to that. Again, we want to understand if you have been involved in research or in programs where you see research not translating into practice, kindly put your responses in the chat as to why. All right, there's weak dissemination, theory versus practicality. That's a good one. People using familiar tools. So there's theory and practice, a theme around that's coming out, not in layman's terms. Different languaging, that's a good one as well. Focus on theory. There's an interesting comment here on inaccessibility of research. Yeah, it takes a while. So the research, by the time we get the research, it's no longer relevant, could be too sophisticated. All right, so there's audience, perhaps, different audience is different from what was designed. Comfort zone, again, has come up. Budget-related constraints and timeline, again, keeps coming up. All right, thank you all for sharing your different experiences. So a lot of it is in line with what we heard, about research not translating into practice. And so if we look at the next slide, a lot of this, frustrations that we've been talking about, we've talked about theory versus practice, we've talked about the audience, inaccessibility of research. So a lot of this is stemming from the traditional view of research, helicopter kind of research. And so this is where research ignores or gives very little consideration for local knowledge and context. And so what happens is that we have questions and recommendations that are not really practically relevant. We've had some of the chat talking about theory versus practice, theory versus what's actually on the ground. And so that's what happens when there's that disconnect and local knowledge is not respected. To add on, with the locals being merely respondents, there's very little engagement and buy-in. And so it really shouldn't be a surprise that there's hesitancy around accepting research, which is primarily seen as foreign. Again, to echo also what Zaira shared earlier, who sets the standards, right? Who determines this is what counts as credible research, this is what counts as rigorous research? Isn't it, to put it honestly, the global north? As a local development practitioner, I have, in my experience, worked with international global north donors who had fixed ideas about programming and not really putting into consideration the local context. And so with this kind of research, or rather this kind of approach, development will remain neo-colonial. And so there is need to think about research differently, because it is and remains a powerful tool that can be used to decolonize development. And so if you click on, you'll see this is why in Youth Excel, we are using an approach called implementation research. And in this approach, a key factor is emphasis on relevance. So this is where we were seeing the difference between theory and practice, because it's not relevant. That's not what happens on the ground. That's not what people need. And so through this application of relevance, we have research questions that are suited for the local context, as well as standards which are based on the usefulness of the findings. Again, in this situation, the researcher is the implementer. So this means the likelihood of the research that is being conducted turning into practice becomes much higher. So unlike the traditional research approach, in implementation research, local youth get to conduct research. And so by doing so, they do get leadership, they do get credibility, and they also get platforms to dialogue with stakeholders. If we look at the next slide, we do want to talk about research to change, how we have rebranded implementation research. So how exactly does it work, right? So as shared earlier, the practitioner, in this case, in Youth Excel, the youth leaders are the researchers. So we break down the barrier that traditionally exists between research and practice and empowering our youth practitioners to systematically learn from their own work. Again, research to change is purpose-driven as opposed to method-driven, because we recognize from what we see that usefulness of research is a key driver of learning for impact. Young people then become motivated to lead research. Why? Because they see the connection between learning and better outcomes. Research to change can be used to explore quite a number of areas. This include feasibility, relevance, effectiveness, sustainability of projects. And so with its wide use, its broad usability, it becomes relevant across the different needs that youth practitioners have, as well as being able to be used in different stages of project implementation. Again, research to change is all about connecting data to decision making, and in doing so, building a culture of continuous learning. So in research to change, it supports the collection of real-time data for real-time decisions. And this is at the organization's own terms, giving them power to decide what they want to learn and why they want to learn it. Lastly, data generated is not only used to strengthen outcomes. True, that is the key goal. But again, data has more value. It becomes a tool for intergenerational dialogue, for youth-led advocacy, and it gives youth a credible voice and a seat at decision-making tables. Again, these are all things that need to happen to decolonize development, to shift power to local youth. To put this approach into perspective, we are now going to hear from Karen Carbajalino and their experience with research to change at the Biz Nation, who are one of our local consortium partners. Over to you, Karen.
Thank you, Sylvia, so much. Can everybody hear me okay? I hope so. Well, it is a pleasure for me to be over here. My name is Karen Carvajalino. I am very, very happy. Before I get started with talking about our project, I want to talk a little bit about what we do at the Biz Nation. We are a social enterprise based in Colombia. We are an e-learning platform that sells online courses focused on marketing, everything related to technology and soft skills in Latin America. But we are a social enterprise, youth-led and youth-serving, which uses parts of its profits in order to create productive education programs, especially focused on women and youth. So for us, it's a huge pleasure to be part of this amazing consortium that is doing so much for youth around the world. Now, talking specifically about our research project, that was the very first one that we developed ever. Let me talk to you a little bit about the problem that we were focusing on, which is actually a problem that not only happens in the Dominican Republic. Go, Mariela, woohoo! But this is a problem that actually happens in a lot of different places in the Dominican Republic, in Latin America. So, number one, increasing number of out of school and out of employment youth in the Dominican Republic. There's actually a term for this in Spanish, which is ninis. Some of you have probably heard it. Ninis means neither studying nor working. And this is youth with huge potential that are currently at home and is rising. COVID, of course, helped increase a lot of numbers, negative numbers. One of them, unemployment, especially among young people. Now, there's also a clear need for entrepreneurs that can create jobs and socio-economic development in the communities. And this is something, of course, we want to promote at the Biz Nation. So with that problem in mind, we created a digital marketing training program, which is amazing because digital marketing skills are skills that can be used to find a job right away, to generate income in a decent and sustainable way, and also to create entrepreneurship that could also be sustainable and profitable for young people. So we created this amazing program working with 11 different communities all around the Dominican Republic. These are communities that are very vulnerable, are also have really high rates of criminality. And we actually had the opportunity to conduct on-site kickoff sessions in each of these communities. And that was absolutely amazing. So after our kickoff sessions, our students had access to 48 hours of live classes via Zoom, 14 hours of virtual courses, 4 mentorship sessions. We had 60 participants, 20 mentors, 7 instructors. It was amazing. It was a great program. Now, the part that I loved the most about this program was that not only we were teaching students about digital marketing, but we were also conducting this amazing and fascinating implementation research project at the same time. Let me tell you something. First time ever we were conducting an implementation research project. Our team was pretty new, but I want to say it was very successful. And I will tell you some of the factors that played a very important role in it. So for our research purposes, we took 2 main learning goals. Number 1, we needed to know the internet access of our potential participants so that we could provide resources to overcome the barriers of online engagement. And also we needed to know participants' perspectives on mentorships so that we could strengthen our participants' engagement strategies. So with this in mind, it was key to have data that helped us better understand these 2 situations in our potential participants so that we could create, we could adapt our programs to be more effective with this data in mind. Let's go to the next slide, please. And let me tell you a little bit of how this program evolved. All right, so with that being said, and our learning goals over there determined and established, we then went to the data portion. Let me tell you something. Never in my life had I understood so much why data is so important. And let me tell you, I did statistics in college, but one thing is to see it in college and one thing is to work with it and see it applied in real life. So over here, after collecting data and analyzing it, we found a couple of things. Number 1, internet was primarily being accessed from mobile phones. So 68.6% of our participants had the possibility to access the internet with their phones. 27.1% had the opportunity to access the internet via computer, and only 4.7% had access to the internet via tablet. Something very interesting as well was that people who identified as ethnic, racial minority had even lower access to the internet. That's 25% versus 16%. And something that was super interesting as well is that the varying schedules from our participants meant group mentorship sessions were not working out. Our participants were studying, some of them were studying and had a job or participating in various extracurricular activities. So they vary a lot in schedules. So the group mentorship sessions were actually a challenge. Now, with this data and these findings, we conducted a couple of adaptations that made a big difference in our program. To begin with, we provided SIM card access, SIM cards with internet access to all of our participants so they could effectively have access to all of our content and program. Something that we also did was adapting the mentorship program so it could be implemented over the phone, WhatsApp, whatever virtual platform that worked best for our participant and our students. And then we also switched to a one-on-one mentorship program from a group mentorship. So group didn't work out. We went and shifted very quickly to a one-on-one basis, and it was amazing. And something that was very meaningful for us and that we will continue to conduct and forever have at the Beast Nation is our content adapted with gender and inclusivity language. Let's go to the next slide, please. So after conducting this, after leaving this amazing process, again, for the first time, conducting this research process, there's 5 main things that we learned, not only for today, not only for the program we conducted in the Dominican Republic, but forever. And I think this is the power of this amazing consortium that is part of YouthPower and USAID and IREX, of course, that it helps us learn and implement and conduct changes forever in our organizations. One of them, we are rolling out our organizational gender policy for any program we implement from now on. That's something that IREX team has definitely been fundamental and essential in order to help us guide us creating this. Number 2, enhancing our mobile learning experience is a priority of ours. We now know that 68% of participants access whatever online programs through their phones. So this is probably going to continue being that way until something crazy happens with the metaverse or something like that. But while that happens, we need to adapt our content to be very user friendly, to provide a great and amazing user experience over the phone. So we've done many things, but definitely want to continue exploring and researching over alternatives that can help us enhance our mobile learning experience. A third lesson learned is the mentorship program that we definitely had the opportunity to improve, and that we will continue to use the improved mentorship program for all other Beast Nation programs. Something that we also are currently working on for future experiences is our innovative training formats. We love microlearning, which is condensing big chunks of information and big courses into capsules that are 2 minutes long that you can send via WhatsApp and your participant gets it on their phone. We are implementing this in other programs with 98% of success rate. I mean, it's great. You get it straight in your phone in a audio format, video format, or PDF format, 2-minute capsules. This is something we want to continue researching, developing, and looking into. And last but not least, data, my people. Data is key. All programs that we will continue to develop, we definitely know we have to learn from data, from the data analysis, and from the data dashboards. We actually have the opportunity to develop our very own data studio in order to visualize data, analyze it in real time in an easy way for all of the Beast Nation team. So it's a very amazing resource that we need to every day learn how to squeeze it, that insight from that data even better. So those are some of the learnings that we've had, and we will continue, I'm sure, to develop from this amazing program. Before I finish, I just want to mention from our experience leading the Beast Nation, how different this program and this experience has been from any other USAID or any other international cooperation program we have been part of. This feels like a huge learning and empowerment experience. I really want to publicly thank the IREX team for working hand in hand, day by day, side by side with us in order to guide us, for example, through this research program, which is the first time ever we've done something like this, or to guide us through the gender policy, which is the first time we've done implementations. As a youth serving and a youth-led organization, we feel our opinions are taken into account in order to create the broader objectives and broader actions of the whole program. And that is something that is very empowering for us. So it really feels very different. We don't feel lost at any point. We feel that there is the IREX team there always supporting all of our activities in order to make it a big success. Michael, it's great to see you here, and thank you. Well, thank you everyone for your time. Sylvia, back to you, and I hope this experience helps you better get from a young leader perspective what this research process has been. If you have any further question, please look us up on Instagram or LinkedIn. We are there as the Beast Nation, or you can find me also in whatever social media as Karen Carvajalino. Thank you so much, guys. Sylvia, back to you.
Thank you, Karen. So looking at the next slide, I know we've shared quite a lot in quite a short amount of time. So just to recap on what the key takeaways here are. Number one, using research to change can shift power to youth. It can help them to run more effective programs, as you've been seeing Karen talking about, and again, consolidate their power through data-driven advocacy. And all of this help to decolonize development. So I'll just pause here. I know we've been receiving a couple of questions, and I'll just share the first one and direct this to you, Diego. And so this comes from Jill Jupiter Jones. She thanks you for your presentation and would like you to expand a little bit more on the fourth finding shared in from the listening series about the formats for knowledge products. So over to you, Diego.
Thank you, Sylvia, and thank you for the question. So I think this actually comes from, there's different places where this comes from. First of all, like it's been a conclusion from an extensive process that shaped the design of a research to change approach. But specifically about the finding that I presented a little bit ago, this basically spoke about how there seems to be this predominance or this importance in the form of the knowledge products and in the way that knowledge is packaged so that it can be considered useful and valuable to the processes of decision making, basically, but just as well as influencing and practicing advocacy at different levels. So when we were talking about this issue with different youth-led and youth-driven organizations that are working with us, we were able to confirm that in most cases, they would try to frame and package the knowledge that they are producing in specific formats so that it will be considered valuable for a decision maker. So they would try to create a traditional report, or they would try to frame it and package it in traditional formats so that it will be considered as valuable and credible. Otherwise, if they would have considered something maybe more creative, maybe something even more innovative, they were afraid that this was not going to be taken into consideration because then it was not as per the standards. So in this regard, we were seeing over and over that there is a lot of youth that are producing a lot of interesting and valuable knowledge, but then they are limiting themselves in the way they are presenting this and the ways in which they're using it, because it might not be taken into consideration given that it's not as per the standards. But again, like who, as we were saying, who sets the standards and which and why, right? Like it's important to ask these questions. So that was that could be an answer for that.
All right. Thanks so much for that, Diego. We do have a couple of questions, and I have two questions specifically for Karen. So the first one comes from Mike, and so he says, thank you so much for BizNation's fascinating learning and implementation research. So Karen, in your mind, what is the next stage of what is needed to expand this type of research model? So again, in your mind, what is the next stage of what is needed to expand this type of research model? That question goes to you, Karen Carbajalino.
Hi, Sylvia. Can you go to the next question, please?
All right. Thank you. All right. So there was also another presentation. There's also another question here from the Q&A feature. Great presentations. Thank you so much. Could the presenters please highlight the evidence base used in developing, implementing, and evaluating your programs? Thank you. So what I can say about this, there's quite a lot of aspects to our program, but specifically when it came to developing our research to change approach, it started with an extensive desk review of implementation and participatory research, because research to change borrows from a lot of these methods. And so we'd be happy to share that with you as well. We also, in terms of our evaluation, we do use those tools like a feedback loop, where we're able to get to know, what is the work that we are doing resonating with our consortium? Are we actually shifting power? And so there's a lot to talk about that, and we'd be happy to share more with you even through our contacts that you'll be able to receive after this session. Again, maybe Diego, you could talk about some of the evidence that you also found through the desk research in the knowledge mobilization process.
Yes, thank you, Sylvia. So there was a lot of interesting, basically just to talk about the process, basically, again, what we're trying to do was that we wanted to understand better what is the process in which the different youth-led and youth-driven organizations that are working with us and also their partners are experiencing. So what is it? What are some of the main challenges? What are some of the main opportunities that happen throughout the process of producing knowledge, particularly research, but also other associated processes? And how is it that youth are therefore experiencing this process? It's like, what is the role? Is it meaningful? Is it not meaningful, and why? And basically, we were able to maybe one big conclusion about this whole process is the fact that there is in paper a tendency towards, let's say, practicing much more like including youth in a more meaningful way. But then when we were talking to the organizations, this doesn't really reflect what most of what's written in the paper says. So then I think what's the evidence based? And I think it's quite broad, but then basically I think it's there's also some insights that we can take from this process, in the sense that there is much more than the evidence that we have. It's also about like who is producing, again, like asking these questions that maybe we're not used to producing, in terms of what evidence can be used to design and build our programs, and to be able to do this differently also.
Para el centro comercial.
All right. Thanks, Diego, for expounding on that. There's also another question that has come in. So Karen, I see you now, but I'll first go to Zaira. And so Zaira, this comes from Hillary. Could you share more on the gender, language, and adaptations needed in development programming? Again, the question is, could you share more on the gender, language, adaptations needed in development programming?
Yes, thank you for this question. And this is a very interesting aspect, especially in Spanish, because we don't have too much problem in the English language, but in Spanish, we need to make specifically for gender some differentials to recognize, to acknowledge the presence of diverse gender identity. So, for example, in the exercise with the Biz Nation, they told us that they haven't think about this, and we did a lot of exercises of reviewing their materials, their language regarding this, and we understand that language is part of how we construct, build, and describe our realities. And this was in line with the content that the Biz Nation was doing. We started also working with the facilitators of their program, and we raise awareness of these. So these are like first steps that need to be taken to start recognizing what we don't usually see, and the importance of being intentional of recognizing the diversity as Diego presented. And to go beyond just language and superficial changes that need to be done, but they doesn't mean anything if we don't do meaningful changes, and if we do not promote meaningful inclusion for all of the participants.
All right, thanks for that, Zaira. I think I see that Karen is now ready to go next. And so Karen, there was a question there from Mike. If you'd like to go ahead and take that question. And just to rephrase, yeah, the question was, now that, you know, with the learning and implementation research that you've done, what is the next stage of what is needed to expand this type of research model?
Thank you so much for that question, Mike. I think it's a great question. And if I had to answer it in one word, it would be training. The more we know, the more we're able to do. The more we understand on how these amazing research processes work, the more we'll be able to apply it to our very own work. So in my opinion, these programs are amazing and we learn by doing a lot. But to me, I think we as young leaders, as people that is working in these youth serving and youth led organizations, need to be trained in everything related to research. I have a background in psychology and statistics, like I mentioned, and all this process was pretty much new. Now imagine a young leader that doesn't have any background in anything related to research, and it's the first time it's hearing something. So I think, Mike, the more we learn about this, the more we learn from real life cases, the more we're able to understand how other people's done it, and the more we learn about research and implementation research, of course, in general, the more we'll be able to take our research projects to a next level.
Thanks so much. I think we have time for just one more question. And Karen, I'll still put you on the spot because this question from Jane.
I love the spot, guys. Come on, bring it on.
All right, this is great because it builds onto what you are sharing. So she says, excellent learning from BizNation, including on adaptive management. So are there key learning points to address systemic issues? And secondly, are there approaches sustainable without donor funding? So is this an example of an education focused business model that is already self-sustaining?
Thank you so much. And I love that question with all my heart, because that's exactly what the BizNation is. We are not a foundation. We are not a nonprofit organization. We are a social enterprise that operates without donors. What we do is we have a sustainable and scalable business model around e-learning. So we have two main business lines. Number one is a B2C line where we sell online courses in 9 countries in Latin America. Our number one market is Colombia, followed by Mexico, Ecuador, Peru, United States. We have many users, Chile and Dominican Republic. Now, that's anybody can come in and buy a course online. And then we have one of our biggest business lines is the corporate training market. So what we do is we use our 120 already existing courses and our platform, which is ours, the tech infrastructure, the LMS is ours. And we use this training platform to provide training, corporate training services to clients such as Telefonica, ports, the industrial area, Nestle, any big company or small mid-sized company that requires corporate training services. And then we take part of our revenue to create these productive education programs that we do all around Latin America, of course, lots of focus in Colombia. So to answer your question, Jane, it is possible. It is what, in my opinion, looks like the future of helping the world, you know, like doing well and doing good at the same time. And I believe the BizNation is a successful example of how a social enterprise can be sustainable, profitable, and also help solve issues, in this case, education, in our case.
All right. Thank you, Karen, for that. And thanks to everyone who's been participating, asking questions. I know we are not able to get to all the questions, but you can see our contacts there. Please, you can get in touch with every one of us or individuals. And there's still ways to get in touch with what we are doing at Youth Excel. You can visit our webpage. You can check out our fact sheet. You can subscribe to our newsletter. And you can be able to do this as you get in touch with us. We'll be able to share with you this link. So thank you so much for all your participation. This has been an exciting session. Thank you.